The afternoon sun was blazing down on the pavement of Malibu, California, creating waves of heat that rose up from the ground. It was one of those beautiful, busy days where the sky is perfectly blue and the air smells faintly of the ocean salt mixing with car exhaust. On a sidewalk near a strip of popular shops, two brothers sat cross-legged on the rough concrete. They looked out of place among the fashionable crowds rushing by with shopping bags and iced coffees. They were just kids, wearing simple t-shirts and shorts, faces flushed from the heat, staring determinedly at a small cardboard box sitting in front of them. Inside the box sat a single toy. It wasn't a brand new, shiny gadget, and it wasn't still in its packaging. It was a small, well-loved plastic action figure. To anyone else walking by, it looked like something that might belong in the bottom of a toy chest, chipped at the edges and worn smooth from years of being held in small hands. But to these two boys, this toy was their favorite. It was the hero of every battle they had staged in their living room and the pilot of every imaginary flight they had taken in the backyard. Yet there it was, sitting alone in a box with a price tag scribbled in crayon on a piece of paper. The older brother, who was about 9 or 10 years old, sat with his arms crossed over his knees, watching people's feet as they hurried past. He was trying to look brave, like a businessman waiting for a customer, but his eyes gave away his nervousness. Every time a pair of expensive sneakers or high heels paused near their box, his heart would beat a little faster, only to sink when the person kept walking without even glancing down. Next to him sat his little brother, who was barely 6. The younger boy looked less brave and more sad. He kept reaching out to touch the plastic figure in the box, his fingers lingering on its head, as if he was saying a silent goodbye to an old friend. They weren't selling the toy because they were tired of it. They weren't selling it because they wanted to buy a video game or a new bicycle. They were selling it because they were hungry and, more importantly, because they wanted to do something special together without asking their parents for money. They had walked past a fancy bakery earlier that morning, the kind that smells like warm sugar and vanilla, and saw giant, colorful cookies in the window. They had checked their pockets and found nothing but lint. So they made a hard choice. They decided that the sacrifice of their favorite toy was worth the price of a treat. "Is he going to come?" the little brother asked softly, looking up at the older boy with wide eyes. "Maybe someone will buy him soon," the older brother replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He didn't want to admit that he was starting to think nobody cared. He adjusted the sign on the box, making sure the price was visible. It wasn't a high price. They just wanted enough to buy the cookies and maybe a couple of sodas to wash them down. Time seemed to move very slowly on that hot sidewalk. A lady walked by talking loudly on her phone, her eyes fixed on a shop window ahead. A group of teenagers laughed and shoved each other, stepping right over the crack in the sidewalk where the box sat without even noticing the two small figures watching them. The city felt very big and very loud, and the brothers felt very small and quiet. The sun continued to beat down on their necks, and the sweat began to trickle down the older boy's back. The younger boy picked the toy up out of the box. He held it up in the air, showing it to the street as if presenting a prize. "Look, it's Captain Speed," he shouted, but his voice was lost in the noise of the traffic and the conversations of the passers-by. A man in a sharp suit glanced over, saw the boy holding the toy, and quickly looked away, hurrying his pace as if the sight of a kid selling toys on the curb was something he didn't want to be part of. The older brother gently pulled the toy down and placed it back in the box. "Don't worry," he said, though his stomach was starting to hurt with anxiety. "The right person will come. Someone who needs a hero." He believed this, or at least he tried to. He looked at the toy again. It was funny how a piece of plastic could feel so heavy. This toy had been with them through moves, through scraped knees, and through thunderstorms. It was the thing they fought over sometimes, but it was also the thing that brought them together. Selling it felt like selling a piece of their shared history. But the smell of the bakery was still fresh in their minds, and the thought of sitting on a bench sharing a giant cookie was a powerful motivation. As the minutes dragged on, the little brother began to slump. He rested his chin on his knees, his gaze drifting away from the box and toward the parked cars along the street. He kicked his heel against the concrete, a rhythmic thumping that showed his boredom and his discouragement. The older brother felt a wave of protectiveness. He reached over and patted his brother's shoulder. "We can wait a little longer," he said. "Just a little longer." The street was filled with stories. Every car had a driver going somewhere important, and every pedestrian had a destination. But for these two, the world had shrunk down to the size of a cardboard box. They were learning a tough lesson that day about how hard it is to get attention in a world where everyone is rushing to the next thing. They were learning that sometimes you have to give up something you love to get something you need. Just then, the light changed. The traffic signal down the street turned red, and the flow of cars slowed. The noise of the engine seemed to drop a decibel, creating a sudden pocket of silence. In that brief, quiet moment, a low rumble began to approach from down the road. It wasn't the loud roar of a sports car trying to show off, but the deep, mechanical growl of a powerful engine. The older brother looked up, watching as a black motorcycle turned the corner and began to glide down the street toward them. He didn't know it yet, but the wait was over. The person riding that bike was about to change their day completely. But for now, the brothers just watched the bike approach, their hopes rising once more that maybe, just maybe, this would be the customer who stopped. The low rumble of the engine grew louder, cutting through the background noise of the busy street like a deep, rhythmic drum. The two brothers looked up from their spot on the hot concrete, their eyes drawn to the source of the sound. Weaving through the slower traffic was a sleek, dark motorcycle. It wasn't the kind of bike that made ear-splitting, screaming noises to show off how fast it could go. Instead, it moved with a smooth, controlled power, gliding between the cars with an easy grace. The older boy watched the bike, admiring how the sunlight caught the shiny metal and the black paint. For a moment, he forgot about his disappointment over the unsold toy. The machine looked cool and dangerous, but the person riding it looked perfectly calm. The rider didn't wear bright colors or flashy gear. He was dressed in a simple helmet, a sturdy jacket, and boots that looked made for riding, not for posing. As the motorcycle got closer, the younger brother nudged his sibling, pointing a small finger at the approaching vehicle. The rider signaled and began to slow down, looking for a place to pull over. The boys watched, expecting him to zoom past or park at one of the fancy meters down the block. But to their surprise, the bike angled directly toward the curb right in front of them, with a soft scuff of tires on the asphalt. The motorcycle came to a stop just a few feet away from the cardboard box. The engine was cut, and the sudden silence that followed felt heavy and expectant. The street noise seemed to rush back in to fill the void, honking horns, distant music, and the chatter of pedestrians, but the boys were focused entirely on the bike. The rider swung a leg over the seat and planted his boots firmly on the ground. He didn't rush. He took his time, checking the mirrors and the handlebars, making sure the machine was secure. The older boy felt a strange mix of curiosity and nervousness. He wondered if this man was going to yell at them for sitting on the sidewalk, or if he was just another person who would ignore them on his way into a shop. The rider reached down and pulled out the kickstand, giving the heavy bike a solid nudge with his hip to ensure it was balanced. A metallic clunk echoed on the pavement. It was a satisfying, solid sound. Then the man reached up and unlatched his helmet. He lifted it off his head, revealing dark, messy hair that was flattened from the gear. He shook his head slightly, running a hand through his hair to let it breathe. As he turned his face toward the sidewalk, the two boys froze. They recognized him immediately. It was a face they had seen on posters, on television screens, and in movie theaters. It was Keanu Reeves. He looked different in real life, tired, but a bit older, and without the movie makeup or special lighting, but there was no mistaking that kind face and those intense eyes. The brothers exchanged a wide-eyed glance. They weren't the type to scream and jump around when they saw a celebrity, especially since they were sitting on the ground feeling small, but the shock was real. The older boy's heart gave a little jump. "Is that?" he whispered to his brother, but he didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew. The little brother gripped the edge of the cardboard box, staring with his mouth slightly open. Keanu didn't look around to see if anyone was watching him. He didn't check his phone or look into a mirror. He just stood there for a moment, taking a breath of the air, looking like a normal guy who had just finished a long ride. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a pair of sunglasses, folding them and hooking them onto his shirt collar. Then, for the first time, he really looked at his surroundings. His gaze swept over the storefronts, the parked cars, and finally, it landed on the two small boys sitting on the curb. This was the moment that usually determined how an interaction would go. Most adults would look at the kids, see the homemade sign and the toy, and politely look away, not wanting to get involved or be asked for money. They would walk past with a tight smile, pretending to be busy. But Keanu didn't look away. His eyes locked onto the cardboard box, and then he looked at the boys' faces. He didn't look annoyed or bothered by their presence. He looked curious. He took a step toward them. Then another. He walked with a loose, relaxed posture, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards or assistants. He was completely alone. As he got closer, the older boy instinctively sat up straighter, trying to smooth out his wrinkled t-shirt. He wanted to look respectable. He didn't want this famous actor to think they were just messy kids causing trouble. "What's going on here, guys?" Keanu asked. His voice was deeper than the brothers expected, but it was warm and friendly. He didn't talk down to them. He spoke to them like they were real people. The older boy cleared his throat, feeling a sudden lump of nervousness. He pointed a shaky finger at the toy in the box. We're selling this," the boy stammered. "It's my brother's favorite toy. We're trying to get some money." The little brother looked up at the tall man standing over them. Keanu was tall, but he didn't tower over them in a scary way. He crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to their eye level. It was a small gesture, but it made a huge difference. It showed that he was willing to get on the ground with them. He looked into the box and studied the little plastic figure. Keanu raised an eyebrow, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "The favorite toy, huh? That's a big sacrifice," he said. He sounded genuinely impressed. "You must really want whatever you're saving up for." The older boy nodded vigorously, relieved that the man wasn't making fun of them. "Yeah, we want to get some cookies from the bakery down the street. But we didn't have enough money, so we decided to sell him." Keanu looked from the toy to the bakery sign visible further down the block, and then back to the boys. The street was still bustling around them. A woman walked by pushing a stroller, glancing at the scene with mild confusion, probably wondering why a movie star was crouched on the sidewalk talking to two kids. But Keanu didn't seem to notice the crowd. For that moment, his entire world was that small patch of sidewalk. He leaned in closer to the box, examining the toy with serious attention, treating it like it was a valuable artifact rather than a piece of plastic. "He looks like a good guy," Keanu said, nodding at the figure. "A hero." The little brother finally found his voice. "He is a hero. He saves the world." Keanu smiled. It was a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Well," he said softly, reaching a hand toward his back pocket, "we can't let a hero just sit here. We need to make sure he gets a good home." The brothers watched his hand, expecting him to pull out a dollar bill or maybe some coins. They were prepared to accept the low price, happy that someone finally wanted to help. But Keanu wasn't reaching for a wallet to make a small purchase. He was about to turn a simple business transaction into a life lesson they would never forget. The air around them felt different now. The disappointment of the last hour was evaporating, replaced by a buzzing sense of anticipation. The boys held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next, unaware that their boring afternoon had just turned into a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. The brothers watched with wide eyes as the actor reached into the back pocket of his jeans. The sun was shining brightly overhead, reflecting off the parked cars and the windows of the shops, but all the boys could see was the man's hand. The older boy felt his heart rate pick up speed. He wasn't sure what to expect. In his experience, adults usually carried loose change or maybe a $1 bill when they passed by kids on the street. He braced himself to be polite, no matter what amount was offered. Keanu pulled out a simple, brown leather wallet. It looked worn and used, the corners frayed slightly. which made the actor seem even more real to the boys sitting on the dusty curb. He wasn't some untouchable character from a movie. He was a guy who carried a wallet in his pocket like anyone else. He flipped it open with a casual motion, his eyes still focused on the little plastic figure in the box. "So," Keanu said, his tone thoughtful, like he was considering a very serious business deal, "you guys are doing a hard job today. Selling your favorite friend is a big deal?" The little brother nodded solemnly, clutching his knees. He looked sad again, remembering that the toy was supposed to leave them. Keanu noticed the look on the younger boy's face. He paused, his thumb resting on the edge of a bill inside his wallet. He looked at the toy, then at the sign they had made, and finally back at their faces. There was a kindness in his eyes that went deeper than just being polite. It was the look of someone who understood what it meant to struggle, even if it was just a small childhood struggle. The actor pulled a bill out of the wallet. It wasn't a $1 bill. It was green and crisp, much larger than the coins the boys had expected. He held it out, not dropping it into the box, but offering it directly to the older boy. The older brother stared at the money. It was a $20 bill. To him, that was an enormous amount of money. It was enough to buy all the cookies they wanted, and maybe some drinks, and even save some for later. Is this for the toy?" the older boy asked, his voice trembling slightly. He reached out a hesitant hand, but he stopped just before touching the money. He looked at Keanu, confused. "Mister, this is too much. The toy is only worth—" "Well, we only wrote down $5 on the sign." Keanu shook his head gently. A small smile played on his lips, but it wasn't a mocking smile. It was a smile of respect. "The price on the sign is what you asked for," Keanu said softly, his voice calm and steady. "But this is what he's worth to me. You guys are working hard out here in the sun. You deserve a good reward for your work." The older boy slowly took the bill, his fingers shaking a little. The paper felt smooth and real. He held it up as if checking to make sure it wasn't fake, and then looked at his little brother. The younger boy's eyes had grown huge, sparkling with excitement. They had never held that much money at one time in their lives. The worry lines on the older boy's face began to fade, replaced by a look of pure relief. They had done it. They had succeeded. Immediately, the older brother remembered the rules of a transaction. He quickly grabbed the plastic soldier out of the box. He held it out to Keanu, offering it with both hands. "Here you go," he said. "Thank you. He's really brave." Keanu looked at the toy being offered to him. It was a small gesture, but it was full of integrity. The boy was honoring the deal. But instead of taking the toy, Keanu closed the boy's hands over the figure with his own large, gentle hands. He pushed the toy back toward the boy's chest. "No," Keanu said firmly but kindly. "You keep him." The brothers froze. The older boy looked down at the toy in his hands, then back at the actor. "But you paid for him," he stammered. "You bought him. He belongs to you now." Keanu shook his head again. He crouched down even lower, balancing on the balls of his feet so he was looking right up at them. The noise of the street, the honking cars, the talking people seemed to fade away into the background. It felt like the three of them were in a little bubble of quiet on the busy sidewalk. "I didn't pay for the toy," Keanu explained, looking from the older boy to the younger one. "I paid for the effort. I paid because I saw two brothers trying to do something on their own. But that toy—" He pointed a finger at the green plastic soldier. "That toy is your friend. I can see it in your eyes, little man. You don't really want to sell him, and I don't want to take him away from you. Every hero needs a team, right? He belongs with you." The little brother looked like he might cry, but this time it was happy tears. He hugged the toy tight against his chest, burying his face in the plastic for a second before looking up again. "Are you sure?" the little boy whispered. "I'm sure," Keanu said, nodding once. "Keep the toy and keep the money. Go get those cookies you were talking about. Buy as many as you can eat." The older boy sat there, stunned. He looked at the $20 bill in his hand, then at his little brother hugging the toy, and finally at the man kneeling in front of him. It didn't make sense in the world he knew. In his world, if you sold something, you lost it. If you wanted money, you had to give something up. But this man had broken the rules of that world. He had rewritten the story just by being kind. The older boy felt a lump form in his throat, a feeling of gratitude so big he didn't know how to speak it. "Thank you," the older boy managed to say, his voice cracking just a little. "Really, thank you." "You're welcome," Keanu replied simply. He stood up then, groaning slightly as his knees popped, stretching his tall frame back to his full height. He brushed some dust off his pants. He didn't wait for them to praise him or thank him again. He didn't ask for a photo or an autograph. He just looked satisfied that they were okay. The brothers looked at each other. The heavy weight of the afternoon, the sadness of selling the toy, and the fear of failure were all gone. In their place was a lightness, a feeling that the world was a magical place where anything could happen. The older boy carefully folded the $20 bill and put it deep in his pocket, patting it to make sure it was safe. The younger brother put the toy back in the box, but he didn't look at it as a product for sale anymore. It was a treasure again. Keanu looked around, his eyes scanning the street. He seemed to realize that the boys might still be a bit lost or unsure of what to do next. He didn't just walk away and leave them sitting there. He pointed toward the bakery down the block, the one with the giant cookies in the window. "You guys go get something good," Keanu said, nodding in that direction. "Make sure you get something chocolate. Chocolate is the best." The boys laughed. It was a nervous, happy laugh. Keanu stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, looking like a guardian angel who had just finished a shift. The sun was still hot, the street was still loud, but the mood on that little patch of sidewalk had completely changed. Two brothers who had started the day with nothing but a sacrifice to make were now sitting with a full pocket and their favorite toy safely back in their hands. And it was all because a stranger on a motorcycle decided to stop and pay attention. The boys slowly got up from the curb, their legs a little stiff from sitting on the hard concrete for so long. The older brother carefully tucked the $20 bill deep into his front pocket, zipping it shut to make sure it couldn't fall out. The younger brother held the plastic soldier tight in his hand, no longer looking at it as a thing for sale, but gripping it like a trophy. They looked up at the tall man in the riding gear, waiting for him to walk away back to his motorcycle. But Keanu didn't turn around. Instead, he nodded his head toward the bakery down the street and started walking. "Come on. Let's go get those cookies," he said over his shoulder. Keeping his pace slow so the short-legged brothers could keep up, the two boys looked at each other in disbelief for a split second, and then hurried to follow him. It felt like a dream. Just a few minutes ago, they were invisible kids on the sidewalk, and now they were walking down the street with a movie star. As they walked, the older brother noticed how people reacted to Keanu. Some people did a double take, their eyes widening in recognition as they passed. A few people pulled out their phones, maybe trying to take a sneaky picture or whispering to their friends. But Keanu didn't pay any attention to them. He didn't put on sunglasses or hide his face. He just kept walking, his hands swinging loosely at his sides. Focused entirely on the two small boys trailing beside him, they reached the bakery, and the smell of fresh sugar, vanilla, and warm bread drifted out to meet them. It was a smell that made the boys' stomachs rumble loudly. Keanu heard the noise and chuckled, a low, warm sound. "Sounds like it's just in time," he said. He held the door open for them, waiting until they had scurried inside before following them inside. The shop was cool and brightly lit. Glass cases were filled with giant chocolate chip cookies, frosted cupcakes, and glazed donuts. The bakery was busy with a line of people waiting to order. The brothers started to hang back. Knowing they didn't have any way to pay yet, they had the $20, but they didn't want to walk up to the counter with a big star. But Keanu gently guided them forward with a hand on each of their shoulders. "We're going to the front," he whispered conspiratorially, like they were on a secret mission. They walked past the line of people. Most of the customers were too busy looking at their phones or talking to notice, but the cashier at the register looked up and froze. Her eyes went wide when she saw who was standing at the counter with two disheveled-looking kids. Keanu leaned on the counter. looking at the display case with genuine interest. He looked down at the boys. Okay, what looks good? Don't hold back. We have plenty of funds. The older brother pointed at the biggest cookie in the glass case, a chocolate chunk one the size of a dinner plate. That one, he said quietly. Good choice, Keanu nodded. And for you? He asked the little brother. The little brother pointed to a brownie, his eyes still wide with wonder. All right, Keanu said to the cashier. We'll take the giant cookie, the brownie, and… He looked around the case. 2 of those big chocolate milkshakes, too. And let's get a box of assorted donuts to go. For the road? The cashier scrambled to put the order together, her hands shaking slightly. She looked at Keanu, then at the 2 boys, and back at Keanu, trying to figure out the story. Keanu didn't offer an explanation. He just pulled out his wallet again and paid for the mountain of food. He didn't use the money the boys had. He paid for it all himself. When the tray was ready, Keanu didn't just hand it to them and leave. He carried the tray over to a small table near the window. He pulled out a chair for the little brother and then one for the older brother, making sure they were comfortable. He sat down opposite them, placing the milkshakes and the massive cookie in the center of the table. Eat up, he told them. You guys earned it. For a few minutes, nobody talked. The boys were too busy eating. The cookie was warm and gooey, and the milkshakes were cold and sweet. It was the best thing they had tasted in a long time. The older brother took a bite and closed his eyes, savoring the chocolate melting in his mouth. All the worry and disappointment from the hour on the sidewalk melted away with every bite. Keanu sat with them, sipping a black coffee he had ordered for himself. He watched them eat with a look of satisfaction on his face. He didn't check his watch. He didn't look at his phone. He was just there, enjoying their company. So, Keanu said casually, breaking the silence. He pointed a finger at the toy soldier the little brother had placed on the table next to his brownie. Does he have a name? The little brother looked up, chocolate smeared slightly on his lip. He nodded enthusiastically. His name is Captain Thunder, he said in a small voice. Captain Thunder, Keanu repeated, nodding seriously. That sounds like a guy you want on your side. Does he have any special powers? The little brother's face lit up. He started telling the story of Captain Thunder, about how he could fly and how he fought bad guys. Keanu listened to every word. He didn't treat it like a cute kid's story. He listened like it was an important legend. He asked questions like, what happens when he runs out of energy? And who is his biggest enemy? The older brother joined in, adding details about the battles they had staged in their room. The boys forgot they were sitting with a celebrity. They forgot they were in a public place. They were just 2 kids talking to a cool adult who actually wanted to hear what they had to say. Keanu laughed at their jokes and looked impressed by their ideas. In that moment, he wasn't the Matrix star or a rich actor. He was just a kind stranger sharing a table. People walked by the window, glancing in. Some pointed, some took photos through the glass. The boys noticed this and felt a sudden pang of shyness, but Keanu just ignored the window completely. He kept the conversation focused on the table, creating a little bubble of safety for them. He taught them something in those 20 minutes that wasn't about money or movies. He taught them that being an adult didn't mean you had to be too busy for kids. He showed them that kindness was about taking the time to sit down and listen, when the cookie was reduced to crumbs and the brownie was nothing but a few smears on a napkin. The brothers sat back, completely full and happy. They looked at the box of donuts Keanu had bought for the road. They had more food than they could possibly eat. The older brother looked at Keanu, feeling a wave of gratitude he didn't know how to put into words. Thank you for the cookie, the older boy said softly. And for, everything. Keanu smiled, reaching across the table to give the table a gentle pat. You're very welcome, guys. It was good meeting Captain Thunder. Take care of each other, all right? He stood up then, signaling that the time had come to go. The boys felt a little sad that it was ending, but they felt incredibly light, like they were floating. They weren't the same kids who had sat on the curb wondering if they mattered. They knew now that they mattered enough for a stranger to stop his whole day just to make sure they had a cookie. Keanu picked up the box of donuts and handed it to the older boy, ruffling the little brother's hair on his way. "Bye. Have a good day," Keanu said. He turned and walked out of the bakery, the bell chiming above the door as he left. The boys watched him go, their hearts full, knowing they would never forget this ordinary afternoon that had turned into something magical. The brothers stood by the large glass window of the bakery, their noses almost pressing against the cool pane as they watched the scene unfold on the street outside. Keanu walked out the door, the small bell ringing above his head to announce his departure. He didn't look around to see if anyone was clapping for him or taking pictures. He didn't act like a big shot who had just done a good deed. He simply walked back to his motorcycle with his hands in his pockets. Moving with the same easy stride he had when he arrived, the little brother held the box of donuts tightly against his chest, as if it contained gold bars instead of pastries. He watched the actor put his helmet back on, covering his kind face once again. Keanu swung his leg over the black seat and kicked the stand up with the heel of his boot. Just before he started the engine, he turned his head and looked back at the bakery window. He saw the two boys watching him. He lifted one hand and gave a small, simple wave. Then, he pressed the ignition button. The engine roared to life, breaking the calm of the afternoon for a brief second. Keanu revved the throttle once, a sound that rumbled in the boys' chests, and then he was off. He merged smoothly into the traffic on the street, becoming just another part of the flow of cars. Within seconds, the motorcycle was gone, turning a corner and disappearing from sight. The street looked exactly the same as it had 20 minutes ago, with people walking and cars driving, but for the two boys inside the bakery, the world felt completely different. They turned away from the window and looked at each other. The reality of what had just happened was starting to sink in. The older brother reached into his pocket and pulled out the $20 bill Keanu had given him. It was still folded neatly. He looked at it, then at the table where they had sat, which was now empty except for their empty plates and milkshake glasses. "He really left," the older boy whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it true. "And he let us keep the toy," the little brother added, looking down at the plastic soldier that was peeking out of his own pocket. "He's a real superhero." The boys pushed open the bakery door and stepped back out into the warm afternoon air. The sun was lower in the sky now, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. They walked back to the spot where they had been sitting just an hour ago. The cardboard box was still there, abandoned on the curb. It looked sad and empty now, a reminder of the disappointment they had felt before Keanu arrived. The older brother picked up the box and folded it flat, tucking it under his arm. They didn't need it anymore. As they began their walk home, the mood between them was lighter than air. They weren't just walking, they were practically floating. They felt taller, as if the act of being treated with such respect had physically grown them a few inches. The older brother thought about how most adults walked past kids without even seeing them, treating them like obstacles or background noise. But Keanu had stopped. He had seen them. He had listened. They passed people on the sidewalk, and for the first time, the boys didn't feel small. They smiled at people. They felt a secret confidence, knowing they had a story that nobody else on that street had. They had met the Matrix guy, and he was nicer than anyone they had ever met. A few days later, the story didn't stay a secret between them. Someone in the bakery that day had taken a video with their phone. It wasn't a professional video, just a shaky clip of a famous actor sitting at a small table with two messy-haired boys laughing and eating cookies. The video ended up on the internet, and it spread like wildfire. Millions of people watched it. People commented about how cool it was, how down-to-earth the actor was, and how heartwarming the scene was, but for the two brothers, the video and the comments didn't matter as much as the memory itself. They saw the news stories and the headlines, but to them, it wasn't a viral moment. It was a personal lesson. They learned that heroes don't always wear capes or jump out of exploding buildings in movies. Sometimes a hero is just a guy on a motorcycle who stops when everyone else keeps going. The toy soldier, Captain Thunder, went back to his place of honor in the boys' room. He was no longer just a piece of plastic. He was a trophy. Every time they looked at him, they remembered the day they almost sold him but were saved by an act of kindness. The little brother decided he would never sell the toy now, no matter what. It was worth too much, not because of money, but because of the story attached to it. The experience changed how the boys viewed the world, too. Whenever they saw someone struggling or someone who looked like they needed help, they remembered the sidewalk. They remembered how good it felt to be the one who was helped when they were at their lowest. It planted a seed in their hearts, a desire to be kind when they grew up. They realized that you don't have to be a movie star to make a difference. Keanu had money and fame, yes, but what he gave them that day didn't cost him anything. It cost him time. It cost him attention. And that was the most expensive gift of all. On the walk home that evening, the older brother reached out and took his little brother's hand. They walked in step together, swinging the box of donuts between them. They talked about everything and nothing about how good the milkshake was, about how loud the motorcycle was, and about how they were going to tell their parents the wildest true story they had ever heard. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. The streetlights flickered on. The boys walked into their house, their bellies full of sugar and their hearts full of joy. The cardboard box was thrown away and the money was put in a jar, but the feeling of the day stayed with them forever. They knew now that even in a big, busy city where people are often in a hurry, there is still room for kindness. They knew that sometimes, when you least expect it, the world surprises you, and somewhere far away, riding through the night on his motorcycle, Keanu Reeves probably didn't think twice about it. For him, it was just buying some cookies for a couple of kids. But for two boys on a sidewalk, it was the day they learned that being a hero is really just about being a good human being.